In this video, I'm going to demonstrate every step that will walk you through how to create an afterthought pocket in your project. I've knit up a little swatch with a 12-stitch pocket here, and we're going to be using a contrast color yarn for the top edge of the pocket as well as the inside of the pocket, just to see all of the steps nice and clearly. To follow along, you can find all of the details about the swatches that I've cast on in the description below the video, but what we're going to need is just a tiny little pair of scissors, a tapestry needle for placing lifelines and seaming our pocket down, and you're going to need 3 pieces of waste yarn. I find it helpful for them to be contrasting, so I have 2 of these really bright nylon cords that I'll be using to place stitches on hold, as well as a piece of waste yarn, and this does happen to be the same yarn that I'm using for the pocket edging to actually knit into our work. So make sure you've got 3 pieces, and if they are contrasting, that'll make it a lot easier. So here I've just got a really simple swatch. It's got a 3-stitch garter stitch edge and a 6-row garter bottom. Those details really aren't important, but if you want to understand what I've done, I've worked 3 garter stitch ridges, and then I've worked 16 rows in stockinette stitch from the top of that garter stitch up to my working needle. And we're going to call this the row where we're going to be placing our lifelines. So this is just a 12-stitch pocket that we're going to be placing over 30 stitches. So we're going to knit 9 stitches over so that we can get to the start of the placement of the pocket. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is place waste yarn through the number of stitches that your pocket calls for. For my pattern, this little sample, I'm calling this a 12-stitch pocket. So we're going to thread our tapestry needle with the bright pink nylon cord, or you can use waste yarn or dental floss. Any of them work just as well. Just make sure it's a nice smooth yarn so you can pull it out easily. And we're going to weave this through the 12 stitches for our pocket. I find it easier to slide these stitches onto the cable to get the needle through the stitches more easily. So we're going to pull that through, and now we can just remove it from our tapestry needle. And those 12 stitches are on the cable still, but they're also on the waste yarn. So now we want to slide those 12 stitches back onto our working needle because we're not done working with them. They don't actually get removed from the needle. This is to make picking the stitches up later easier. All right, so now we're going to grab our second piece of waste yarn. Don't recommend using like a nylon cord or dental floss for this piece. You want to use a weight of yarn that is similar to the project. So now what we're going to do, we're going to leave our project working yarn here, the purple. We're going to pick up and knit our waste yarn, or pardon me, pick up and get ready to join our waste yarn. And we're going to knit across all 12 stitches that we just placed the waste yarn through. And this creates kind of a holder so that we can remove it later and have the opening of the pocket. All right, so now we've knit all 12 stitches of the pocket, and these are the same 12 stitches that we just placed on the waste yarn. The next thing we need to do is we're going to slip all 12 of these stitches that we've just knit with our waste yarn back to the left-hand needle, and you're going to want to do this purlwise. And we're going to work back across these 12 stitches in our working yarn so that we can continue the project above this line without interrupting the design. And this just happens to be a stockinette sample, but if you were working a cable pattern or a color work pattern, you want to make sure you're not interrupting the pattern too much. Okay, so we've now placed our waste yarn through the 12 stitches that will become the pocket. We've knit 12 stitches with waste yarn on top of it, and now we're going to knit 12 stitches across that pocket using our working yarn. So now we've got our row done. Again, I find it easier to pull the work back onto the cable rather than trying to place the lifeline while the stitches are on the needle. And we're going to thread the tapestry needle with our third piece of waste yarn. Again, I'm using a nylon cord. You can use actual yarn or dental floss. And now we're going to thread this through the 12 stitches that we just worked across in our working yarn. Okay, so now you've placed all 3 of your lifelines, you've worked your waste yarn into the project, and that's it for the setup of the pocket. From now you can just continue your work in your pattern and come back to this when the majority of the project is done. So here I am with a completed version of the swatch. I've knit past where I placed my lifelines, and I've actually blocked this a little bit so it's easier to see what we're doing, but you certainly don't need to block your project before you do these steps. So what we're going to be doing now is placing these stitches that we have on hold onto our working needle. The front of the pocket, the ribbing, this section here, gets worked using the lower stitches and is knit upwards. If this was a sweater, this would be your lower hem, this would be your shoulder. And then these upper stitches what form the inside of the pocket, and we actually will place those on the needle, turn the work around, and work them in the opposite direction towards the hem of the sweater. So here's what I like to do with my waste yarn. Some people cut it out. You absolutely could. You could very carefully go in with your needle and snip along those blue stitches. But because it's a smooth yarn, I tend to just pick them out so that I don't accidentally cut my working yarn. So now that we've got the waste yarn out, the blue yarn that we took out, I've got 2 sets of live stitches left on these nylon cords. I like to start with the bottom first, so we're going to place these stitches onto our working needle purlwise. They're already on the waste yarn in the correct orientation, so it's really easy to just insert your needle from right to left or purlwise and put each of the 12 stitches back on your needle. You can choose to remove the waste yarn right away if you would like. I tend to leave my waste yarn in just in case I make any mistakes while I'm working that front ribbing, and then once I know the front ribbing is done and complete, I can go ahead and remove it. So I'm going to pull my needle all the way through so that I'm ready to work across the right side of this project. And we're going to grab the working yarn that we need to use for the front edge of our pocket. Remember, this is a 12-stitch pocket. Into the first stitch and the last stitch, we're going to increase. I use a KFB so that we end up with a 14 stitch, or pardon me, basically we end up with 14 stitches on our needle to work this front ribbing. And that just allows you to sew down the edges of the pocket without compromising on the width of the pocket itself. So we're going to insert our needle into that first stitch, grab our working yarn, and we're just going to loop it around and work that first stitch. I work it as a KFB. Grab the right leg, and we're just going to work across these 12 pocket stitches in stockinette stitch so that you don't end up with any purl bumps in your contrasting yarn. If you are using the same color of yarn for your pocket edging as you did for your project, you could probably work across in pattern. It'll really depend what your pattern instructions tell you to do. All right, so we're going to work across and we're going to work that last stitch as a KFB. So now we've got 14 stitches on our needle where we started out with 12. And again, you can leave this waste yarn in here until all of your ribbing is done. So I'm gonna stop the video here and I'm gonna work my ribbing so that it looks like this. We've got 4 rows of ribbing there, and then I'll show you how to do the inside of the pocket. Okay, so now that this pocket front is done, we can remove this lower waste yarn that we used to hold those live stitches. And I just want to address a couple of things because we've got a lot of tails going on here. The tail that you used to start your pocket can be sort of a standard length. You're only going to use it, or at least I only use it, to seam the edge of my upper pocket to the front of the sweater. So it doesn't need to be super long because once you've seamed up those few stitches, you'll put it to the back side and weave it in. The tail from my bind off edge, however, I leave quite long, and what this allows me to do is not only seam down the edge of the pocket to the front of the sweater, but it allows me to insert it to the back once that edging is seamed down and seam the entire side and lower half of the pocket to the inside of the sweater. This is just a preference. You don't need to do that, but it leaves fewer edges for weaving in. The last thing I want to talk about is the bind off that you use for your edging, the front pocket ribbing. I tend to use a standard bind off in pattern, meaning I'll bind off the knit stitches knitwise, the purl stitches purlwise, but I don't use a stretchy method like Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off or the elastic bind off, because that tends to make the top edge a little bit thicker. I think you want to have a nice clean edge that is stretchy but doesn't double up. Again, that is a preference. There's no rules against it. Just want you to know what I like to do. Okay, so now what we want to do, and I'm going to deviate from what a lot of patterns say these days. A lot of them will have you seam this pocket edge down right now. But I find it harder to work that way, so I leave this unseamed while I work the inside of the pocket. So this is the lower edge of your sweater, your bottom hem, and this would be closer to your armholes or the top of your sweater. So to work the inside of the pocket, we actually turn the work 180 degrees, and we now place these live stitches for the inside of the pocket onto our working needle. So now we've got all 12 stitches on our needle again, and we're going to pull the needle all the way through so that we can work the stitches with the right side facing. And we're going to do exactly what we did to start the front ribbing. We're going to grab our working yarn, and you can leave a normal length of tail here because you're not going to be using this one to seam the pocket down. We're just going to leave enough to weave in. And we're going to start knitting across those stitches, working the first stitch as an increase. So I do a KFB, and then knitting across the remaining stitches to the last stitch, where we will also work it as an increase as a KFB. So again, just like the ribbing that we worked on the front, we've now got 14 stitches because we worked our first 2 stitches as increases. And now we're going to work in stockinette stitch down towards the bottom hem. And what I like to do is, I know how many rows I worked up to this point. Earlier I mentioned that I worked 16 rows from the hem upwards to the pocket placement row. I take off 1 row from that and work, or pardon, I guess 2 rows. Yeah, 2 rows, and work 14 rows back in this direction. Our 15th will be our bind off row. So I'm going to knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side, so we have a stockinette liner for our pocket, and I'm going to make it 14 rows of stockinette stitch, and then the 15th row will be the bind off row. Now I've finished the 14 rows of the inside of my pocket. So since we've got a lot of tails going here, we can now remove this piece of waste yarn, but don't get rid of it just yet. We're going to use it to help us seam our pocket. So the pocket, when I started it, I left just a standard length tail because this isn't really going to be used to seam anything. We've got the long edge from our front of pocket that we're going to use to seam down. At the bind off edge of the pocket, I've left another long edge, another long tail, pardon me. And we'll use this to seam the inside of the pocket to the inside of the sweater. So to get started, I am just going to tuck the inside of the pocket through the hole, and we're going to start by seaming the edge of the pocket to the front of the sweater first. But I find I get a little turned around with all of the columns of stitches that I have to do seaming. So I've developed a little method that works really well for me using that waste yarn that we pulled out from our live stitches. And I'm going to set myself a column of target stitches to make sure that I'm seaming the pocket down to the correct column all the way down my work. So this, you can see very clearly, these are the 12 stitches of our pocket right here. So I'm going to start a couple of rows up on the outside of that rightmost stitch, and I'm going to insert my tapestry needle under the bar between stitches. I'm going to skip the next one, go down, and we're going to do this down every other stitch all the way down that column of stitches where we need to seam our pocket. And this just helps us keep the edges of our pocket straight as we work down it, especially when we turn to the wrong side. I have a hard time seeing which columns are which when I've got the reverse stockinette stitch facing me. So I just do this, and you can do every third row if you want, every row. Well, you can't do every row. If you did every row, it would actually pop out because we're just running this under the horizontal bars. So there we go. So now I've just got this line of waste yarn that goes vertically down the edge of my pocket. I'm going to pull that through in theory. There we go. And this is just a target so that when I'm mattress stitching this edge into this column, I can make sure I'm grabbing stitches in the same column all the way down the work. Now I'm going to place a lifeline waste yarn, the same thing, down the other side of the pocket, and then I will show you how I start seaming the pocket to the work. Got our 2 rows of waste yarn going vertically up the work. And if you just want to check your work, you should be able to count 12 columns of V stitches, full V's, between your vertical lengths of waste yarn. And that way you know that you've got them in the right columns, and you can start seaming your work down to the face of your sweater. So we're going to start at this edge. This is the starting edge of the pocket ribbing. I've just tucked the tails of the inside of the pocket to the wrong side of the work. And I'm going to seam using the mattress stitch method into the face of the sweater and then into the face of the pocket so that we get a nice clean edge. So I pick up the first horizontal bar at the edge of the work, and this happens to be in front of the waste yarn that we placed. So we're going to go under, pull our tail through, and now we're going to go find that same horizontal bar on the edge of the pocket. We've got our column of knit stitch here, and then our edge stitch, which is also a knit stitch. We need to find the horizontal bar between those two. There it is. All right. So we're going to go under that horizontal bar. Now we're going to go back to the face of the sweater. And the second bar we want to pick up is actually behind that waste yarn that you placed in there. So we're going to go underneath there. We're going to go back to the face of the pocket and find the next horizontal bar between our stitches. And we're going to go back and forth until all edges of the pocket are seamed down to the face of the sweater. And once that's done, you will be done with this tail. You can push it through to the wrong side and weave in that end. So now the right edge of the facing of our pocket is seamed to the front of the sweater, and I've woven in the end on the wrong side. If you would like some more information on weaving in ends, I have a tutorial on how to weave in ends, and I'll put a little link to that below the description in the video. Now we're going to come over and seam the opposite side of the pocket, but we're going to be seaming from the top down. So we need to count up our 4 rows from where the pocket starts and begin seaming there in this column that we've got marked with our waste yarn. Just make sure you don't pull this waste yarn out yet. We're still going to use it to seam the inside of the pocket. So we're going to count up. Here we go. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So that's the first bar we want to go under, is that 4th row. We're going to go under that bar, pull our yarn through, and going to find the matching bar on the pocket between those edge columns. So there's our knit stitch. Here's our edge column. So we're going to find that first horizontal bar under there, and make sure you don't create knots. You may actually find it easier to turn your work at this point. So I should have done that to start out with. I apologize. So now we're going to go find the next bar on the sweater side, and it's going to be sort of beside or behind that waste yarn. pull it through, and find the matching bar in the face of the pocket, just like we did on the other side. All right, so we're going to keep going down these next couple of rows to seam that, and then we're going to turn our work to the wrong side, and I'll show you how to seam down the inside of the pocket. All right, so now we've got the second side of our pocket seamed down to the face of the sweater. Now we need to seam the inside of the pocket to the inside of the sweater to complete it. So what we're going to do is, because our working yarn is on the front of the work, I'm going to just find the hole where the seaming seems to start. Looks like this one here. And we're going to push the tail of the yarn all the way through to the wrong side. And I'm going to leave this work upside down while I do this. So what we're looking for as we seam the edge of our pocket to the edge of our sweater are alternating bumps on the pocket side versus the garment side. So if you look at the bars that we went through on the sweater side, they kind of make an upside down circle. Knit Purl Hunter refers to these as frowns because they kind of go upside down. You could call them a horseshoe, I suppose. And we're looking for the adjacent smile or upside on the other side of the, or I guess on the pocket side. So when I go under these sort of smiles, the stitches that form like an arc going the opposite way, these are what makes the bar between the stitches on the right side of the work. So we're going to be alternating back and forth between the upside down or the frown and the smile on this edge. So I'm going to start on the body side of the garment, and we're going to pick up that lowest sort of frown below where we pushed our work through. So we're going to grab that one and pull our needle through with all that yarn. And then we're going to find the lowest smile on this side, go underneath it, and pull it through. And you're going to want to do this at the same rate as you did the front of the garment, and you're just going to do one row on each side so that your pocket stays the same length as your garment. So our next frown is here. We're going to pull that through. And our next smile on the other side is going to be right here. So we're going to continue this all the way, boy, that really wraps around the project, doesn't it? We're going to continue doing this all the way down the edge, continuing to use this waste yarn as our indicator. And you should stop before you start to work horizontally, and I'll show you the method that I like to use to do that. Okay, so now I've seamed up the entire edge of my pocket, alternating between the garment side and the pocket side using kind of those frowns or the upside down stitches and the smiles or the right side up stitches. And now, just for a sense of accomplishment, you can remove your waste yarn. You are done with that edge of the pocket. Whoops, it's nice and tidy, and all of your stitches are in line with the adjacent column. So using this long tail that we used to seam the edge of the pocket to the inside of the sweater, we're going to continue seaming the bottom of the pocket across the bottom of the sweater. On the outside, this would be just above the garter stitch hem. And to do this, we're going to kind of duplicate stitch our way across the row. We're going to be using these V's from the bind off edge, and we're going to go into them one direction and back out another direction, and we're going to duplicate stitch the purl bumps above it in and over. So we're going to sort of touch every stitch twice. So to begin, we're going to find that leftmost V from the bind off edge. We're going to insert our needle under both legs of that V and pull our working yarn through. And next we're going to, and I should say, we're pulling it through from front to back. If you think of the pocket faces facing you, we're going to push it through from front to back. And next we're going to find the purl bump above that bound off stitch, and it looks to be this one here. So we're going to go under the smile to the left of it, from bottom to top, if I can grab just one stitch. We're going to pull through. And over top of that purl bump, we're gonna sort of make the motion of coming up over top. We're gonna go underneath the smile to the right of it and back under both legs of that same V that we came through, but now we're gonna come from front to back. So you've grabbed that upper smile from top to bottom, and now you're gonna go from front to back through both legs of that V. And these are the steps that we're gonna repeat across the bound off edge of the bottom of our pocket. So we're gonna now move to the next V, which would be this one here. Here's our first one. We're gonna insert from front to back under both legs, find the next stitch in that same row and go under the smile we just came out of, pull through, go sort of over top and find the next smile, go into it from top to bottom, and then into the same V from back to front, making sure you're under both legs of that V. I'll show you that one more time because it's hard to see when I'm pulling so much yarn. We're going to find the next V and go under both legs from front to back, go under the smile you just came out of, pull through, go over top of that next purl bump and go into the smile from top to bottom, and then under both legs of the same V from back to front. And you're going to repeat that all the way to the end of your bound off stitches, and your final stitch should be this last one right before you get to your waste yarn column, where we're now going to, or where we will finish binding off the edge of the pocket. So here we are at the end of the bottom of the pocket seaming. You can sort of see some blue stitches as duplicate stitches along the garter, or the purl bumps of the bottom of the pocket. But now this edge and this edge are both secured on the inside of the sweater. There should be one bound off V left to the end of your row. And that's because we bound off 14 stitches, which means that there are 13 bind off V's. And now that last one is going to form the basis of seaming up the side of the pocket. And this is going to be just like seaming up this other edge, but we're going to turn our work, go under the smiles that we've got here on the body side, and find the adjacent frowns on the edge of the pocket side. Now, I left a very, very long tail when I did this pocket seam, so you can either continue to use this up the edge and weave it in, or you can stop here if you've got such a long tail, weave it in here, and use the tail that was left over from the bind off edge of the pocket. Either way, you're going to want to make sure that both tails are secured. But I'm going to leave you to do the mattress stitch up the side of this work because it's exactly the same as what we did on the other side. And then we can take a look at our finished pocket once that edge is done. So once you've finished seaming up this last edge of your pocket, your tail should now be right at the edge of where you seamed down that very first piece of your pocket edging. You can remove your waste yarn now because you're all done. Whoops. And all you'll have left to do is weave in the tails that you have remaining. So I ended up using the same tail all the way around the pocket, so I'll have to weave in this end. And I do have this little tail all the way down in the bottom of my pocket that is from the bind off edge, and I'll just push that through to the back side of the pocket and weave it in on the wrong side. But there you go, there's your little pocket, and it'll smooth out nicely with some blocking. Here's the original sample that I did. So all that puckering will go away and smooth out, and you end up with a cute little Afterthought pocket. I hope you had fun with this tutorial. I know it was a long one, but happy knitting!